My name is Donna Thiessen, and I am the scholarly communication librarian with Sask Polytechnic and one of the coordinators for this week of activities during Open Education Week. So welcome, everybody. Glad that you could make it here today. And at the end of the session, I'll just let you know that we do have a number of other sessions that are going to be happening throughout this week, and would invite you to consider attending those as well. So let me just step forward here. I'm going to suggest that I'm going to be providing a greeting here, but I would ask anybody that's interested in providing their own greeting in the chat and letting us know where you're joining us from. And if you're with Sask Polytechnic, I would invite you to just provide greetings from your unit or your division or your program. And we also are interested in knowing if there's any students that are attending. So let us know for sure if that's the case. So welcome. Aninsikwa, Edlanate, Haukoda, Haukona, Haukola, Tawau, and Tanshi. We'd like to acknowledge that we work and live on Treaty 4 and Treaty 6 territories for Sask Polytechnic. And these are the homelands of the Métis Nation. We give thanks to the original caretakers of this land, the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Dene, and Saulteaux people, who recognize the beauty and the provenance of this land. On a personal basis, as a non-Indigenous librarian, I recognize the importance of finding and sharing sources of information to help my patrons understand the historical harms that have occurred on this land. And as the descendant of settlers of this land, I acknowledge the privileges that are part of my legacy. So during this session, it will be recorded and we will be posting it to the Sask Polytechnic YouTube channel with an open license. The recordings will be available for you to use and share, and the web address will be emailed to you when it is available, which will probably be in about a week, I think, for us, just to give us a little bit of time to pull all the pieces together for it. Questions can be added to the chat, and so this is planned as an interview, and if you do have questions that you would like to see put to our two guests, you're welcome to put them into the chat and I will incorporate them into our interview. There'll also be time at the end if you had very specific questions and you wanted to address our two guests specifically, you're welcome to do that at the end. We are welcoming attendance from both Sask Polytechnic and from the international community today through the OE Global site. We've got quite a number of people that are attending from other places. I'd ask that you stay muted during the presentation. At the end, as I mentioned, when we open it up for questions, you're welcome to unmute at that time. So our guests today, we have Dr. Bettina Schneider here and Dr. Arzu Sardarli. So Dr. Schneider is an associate professor in Indigenous business and public administration at the First Nations University of Canada. She was formerly the Associate Dean of Community Research and Graduate Programs and the Associate VP Academic at First Nations University. She has worked there since 2007. She has also been a visiting professor with Simon Fraser University's Indigenous Business Leadership EMBA program in the Simon Fraser Beatty School of Business since 2022. She received a BA in History with honors from New York University and an MS in Community Development and a PhD in Native American Studies from the University of California. Dr. Schneider has also worked as a consultant for First Nations Development Institute, First Nations Owista Corporation, and Opportunity Finance Network in the US. Her research predominantly focuses on Indigenous community and economic development strategies, Indigenous relevant business and financial literacy curriculum, and Indigenous research methodologies. She is also the developer of the resource Financial Empowerment, Personal Finance for Indigenous and Non-Indigenous People, which we'll be focusing on today. As well, we have Dr. Arzu Sardarli, who works in leading research institutes and universities in Azerbaijan, Ukraine, and Canada. He joined the First Nations University of Canada in 2007. Dr. Sardarli led a number of community-based research and education projects conducted in First Nations community. He uses Indigenous elements in his teaching. Dr. Sardarli advocates for holistic methods of teaching and open education resources. He co-authored the first Cree dictionary of mathematical terms with elements of Indigenous art. The online version of the dictionary has been developed within the Open Education Resources Program at the University of Regina and published on the Pressbooks portal. And I'll be providing links for both of those resources shortly. Dr. Sardarli led a pioneer research project on mathematical modeling of water quality using Indigenous knowledge. He coordinates a nationwide annual Wiseman Mathematics Contest initiated in 2008. His projects have been supported by agencies, and so my apologies, and I should know these terms, but NSERC, SHRC, Health Canada, and Canadian Heritage. He received the Recognition Event Awards of the Regional Centre of Expertise for Saskatchewan for his innovative Indigenous community-based project. So welcome, Dr. Sardarli and Dr. Schneider. We are thrilled that you are here today, and you're going to be telling us about your resources that you've developed. I'm just going to stop my share at this point so we can see you as we proceed with the interview. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us about yourselves that I may not have covered in the introductions?
Donna, thank you. I think you certainly covered my background well, and I appreciate that. And I just want to say thank you to you and Sask Polytechnic for inviting us today to share. So thank you.
Okay, well, I think the first question that I wanted to ask you is about your resources and how long it took you to develop those resources. We have people, I think, within the audience that are probably contemplating similar projects, and it'll be really interesting to hear a little bit more about the development of the projects and what was involved. So I'll start with you, Dr. Sardarli.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for inviting me. I just, if it's possible, I had approximately some suggestions about the questions, and I prepared some slides, and if it's possible, if I could share my screen, and
I think
maybe
we're set up if you wanted to do that.
sorry?
We are set up if you wanted to just
Yeah.
grab and share there. You
Yeah,
can.
I'll try. I'll try if it's working, and see. Yeah. Maybe first, just I would like to know about audience to get some information, and then my answers would be more focused. I will share a link on the chat. If you could answer the questions, you can just click on that link and choose your answers if you want. It doesn't contain any virus, any spam, no worries. The reason, I mean, how long it took, I joined, as you mentioned, I joined the First Nations University in 2007. And I was lucky, I worked with I met elders, Indigenous elders, Elder Tony, Elder Ken Goodwill, and they first kind of their message was that we hired you to teach our students. And to be honest, I didn't have I didn't know too much about Indigenous people, although my own background ethnical background is close to Indigenous people. In my native country, we also have like my grandmother, she was elder, and my last name is translated as a child of chief. So someone in my family was a chief, used to be chief maybe 100 years ago. So I was familiar with indigenous culture in general, but I didn't know too much about Canadian Indigenous people. And when I started teaching, in parallel, I was learning. I was learning from elders, and one first thing that I've noticed when I give examples, like in my physics or mathematics courses, sometimes examples don't work well, and I try to make some changes to make examples maybe more understandable for Indigenous students. First thing, I started using Indigenous names. Like a boy is walking from point A to B. Instead of boy, I tried to use Indigenous names. Or then I tried to use if you explain sound waves in physics, I tried to give examples about the drum. And then because many of my students, they were adult people, Indigenous people, and I tried to learn about their communities, what they about their lifestyle, just as this human being. I was interested just for the curiosity. And then when you build some trust with people, they start sharing information about problems. And one of my students, he was a headman from PPK's First Nations community. He told me about the water quality problem, that they face that problem, and not only in their communities. And he was kind of, he was 60 plus years old. He told me that, can you use your mathematics to do something with our water? I asked him what specifically he would need. He said, from time to time, we receive the kind of that we have to stop using the water. We have to use boiled water, but it is kind of too little, too late. So it would be good at least to know about that in advance. That's okay. In 1 month, your water is getting worse, and you have to get ready. That in 1 month you cannot use that water. So in my understanding, it's he needed something to create some projections about the water quality dynamics. And that was my kind of first experience working with Indigenous communities. Then I traveled to community, and I tried to develop the kind of mathematical model of water quality, but not using the biological or chemical measurements, because they simply did not exist. In many Indigenous communities, governments, they don't have a monitoring data. And we decided to use Indigenous knowledge. So using that Indigenous knowledge, we created mathematical model. And it's kind of coincident, but I'm very happy for this one, that on the second phase of that project, I collaborated with Bettina. Bettina, if you remember, it was we started the project in 2009, and I believe that was approximately 10 years after, or maybe 2018 or something. We traveled with Bettina, the Kyakushta community, to monitor water quality again and to check to verify that model if it worked or no. And we administered the survey in Kyakushta community because Kyakushta and Pipikis, they are neighborhood communities. They use the same water. So that was my first kind of experience. And I understood that if I want to kind of make my classes more interesting for Indigenous students, I need to provide more examples relating to Indigenous people's problems, Indigenous people's lifestyle, and etc. So that was my first experience, how I started. And another concern that I've received from my students, from my Indigenous students, that was affordability of resources, educational resources. And so that's my another link I want to share with you, if you can answer that question too. It looked like the textbooks that we offer, they are too expensive. And sometimes, not sometimes, very often students cannot afford those textbooks. I'm just looking to find where to put the chat. Okay, I'll find it. And if you could answer another question, that question is about if you can afford the if you're not students, when you were a student, were you how affordable was textbook for you? I want to share another slide. Yeah, so mostly I see most of people, I expected that answer. Now I want to show you another slide. It's kind of statistical data that were received in 2016. Nearly 40% of Canadian post-secondary students experience food insecurity. It's just about the food. So now think about the textbook. And the second diagram here, you see prevalence of poverty amongst Indigenous populations by province. Again, it's 2016. Now it's even worse. So that I found out that is one of the biggest problems of our students to afford the textbooks. And these two things, combination of Indigenous content and affordability, gave me the idea to start working on open educational resources. I want to stop here and let Bettina talk. You have to stop me sometimes.
Thanks, Arzu. Yeah, those are great resources and questions. So thank you very much for sharing sharing that. And so I would just add, well, I certainly want to add a couple points to what Arzu shared, but just to go back to the question, how long did it take to develop the book and what was involved? It took me about 2 years from the application I made, the proposal I submitted to the U of R for funding, to the date of publication. So I applied for proposal funding in 2016. And I received that funding in 2016 and really didn't get access to those financial resources probably later 2016. And then, really started diving into the research and hard work in 2017. The book, I had some resources that I certainly was able to access from earlier points in my career that certainly helped. I had done a project with the Nuo-Yatina Friendship Center in 2013. They had asked to work with me on culturally relevant financial literacy workshops. And so that helped to give me a bit of a foundation. I luckily had also, in my previous consulting work and just through my dissertation research on Indigenous financial institutions, I had been exposed to a number of Indigenous financial institutions in the US and Canada, and just a number of resources often through Indigenous organizations, such as First Nations Owista Corp, First Nations Development Institute, the Aboriginal Financial Officers Association of Canada. All of that really helped me immensely. Having that foundation earlier on helped me immensely to do this work more quickly, but it still took quite a bit of time. I had to work, certainly gather a number of resources, from within Canada. I took a US-based open access resource on textbook on personal finance, and I had to adapt it to include certainly Indigenous relevant content, which was really absent from so many of the personal finance resources, textbooks here in Canada. But I also had to adapt it to a Canadian audience, and so that was an enormous amount of work. I did not realize how much work it would be. It was certainly completely worth the journey. But I was also dealing with having one very demanding administrative role at the time. Two, if I can, because I was asked to jump into some other admin tasks. So I'd say that, being the associate VP academic while doing this project was not easy. I had to work really at night and on the weekends to be able to do a lot of the work, which was challenging. But I had wonderful support through the U of R Open Education Resource Program. The program manager there, Elsa Johnston, was just amazing. She helped me a lot to make the connections I needed to make, such as, I had to find peer reviewers of the text. I had to work with copy editors. I had to work with video editors for the elder interviews that are in the textbook. I had to prepare a video introduction on how to navigate the textbook. Elsa was just foundational in helping me to find the people I needed to find to do this work. Had to find people, someone who could help me edit all the tables. There were so many tables in the textbook. So yeah, it was really a team effort, and I'm just lucky I was able to find such a good group of people to work with.
I just figured out how to do the spotlight button. I got to say, I'm pretty proud of myself. So Bettina, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to stick with you while I've got you spotlighted here. So that's really interesting. I mean, I think, in the time that I've been in this position, I'm the support for our open resources that are developed at Sask Polytechnic here. And I think that is such a common story, but both the fact of discovering, it's a textbook. What is a textbook? And really starting to think about what it is and all the pieces that are involved and the teams that are involved in it, I think is very common here. And the second one is shifting into a much more challenging role and trying to finish a textbook. And I think we have people certainly within the Polytechnic that have found that challenge as well. But I do have a question for both of you. I mean, I'll start with Bettina. So, and it's, why did you decide to publish an open textbook particularly. And I think this is also perhaps a bit of a journey that we have had the funding that's been available from the province that people could access, which has been very helpful in the development of a textbook. But I think often as we start to move within that, there's other things that we discover about the open textbook. So I just wanted to hear a little bit about your journey there.
Thanks, Donna. Yeah, there were certainly a couple big reasons at the time why I wanted to embark on this journey. One is very much connected to what Arzu spoke about, which was cost. I was seeing a lot of my students not buying the texts in my business classes, in the Indigenous Business and Public Admin program. The texts are expensive. Oftentimes, the cost, was often over $100, sometimes close to $200. Students were not purchasing the books, and they were trying to get through the class just on PowerPoints and class notes. It was challenging. I saw a number of students not doing well in the course at the end of the semester, and just to give you a sense of my student body in my classes, I have often, especially in my personal finance class or some of my larger classes in business, I'll often have a third of the students First Nations University students, another 2/3 often coming from the U of R, a third Canadian-born students, a third international students. So, really, we have a third First Nations University, third international, a third Canadian-born students and from the U of R. And so we're having this, these different audiences within the class. And I would say for a number of the students, cost was certainly an issue for these texts. And because they weren't being purchased, we were seeing a number of students just not doing well. So that was one factor, Donna. And then the other factor was accessibility was critically important to me at the time. I was teaching video conference classes, often, 4 to 6 locations at a time. So I had students in Regina, Prince Albert, La Ronge, Isle La Crosse, Buffalo Narrows. I had students all over the province, and a lot of the students in more remote communities were also having challenges getting the text on time. Sometimes the textbooks would be delayed in terms of their arrival. It was easier often for me to have the text on the screen in the class. Because my classes were video conference, I would have this, and certainly now with Zoom, I'm teaching through Zoom in my classes, and so I can share my screen, I can share my textbook, I can share all the resources that are in the text. It has helped streamline the class, and just the flow of teaching, I find is often much better because I have all my critical resources in one textbook, and that I can share those very easily through the screen. So those are two key reasons why open access was really helpful.
So I'm going to pose the same question to you, Arzu, about what you've discovered in terms of this journey and why you particularly chose to create this as an open resource. I think you're muted there, but we'll darn mute.
Okay, sorry. I hope you can hear now. Yeah, but Bettina answered partially. I don't know, can you see my screen now?
We can see your screen.
Okay, good. Yeah. So I think that was 2015. I was, as you mentioned, I coordinate the mathematical contest for First Nation schools across Canada, and I had communication with math teachers, and many of them, they were very kind of, they asked me if they would love to teach mathematics in native languages, but they have problems with terminology and etc. So my colleagues, Ida Swan, Willie Ermine, they are Cree speakers, and me, we decided to publish a Cree dictionary of mathematical terms. Apparently that was very challenging because many mathematical terms simply did not exist in Cree, and we had to compose some words, mainly Ida and Willie. I'm not Cree speaker, and we published a Cree dictionary, and we just donated them to Cree schools across Canada. We published 320 copies. And then I kept receiving emails from communities, from educators, from teachers, from students, even not only for Indigenous. I had this at the University of Alberta, there is a club, Indigenous engineering club or something. They asked me about this extra copy, and simply we didn't have extra copy. We handed out everything. Then I decided to develop the online version of the dictionary. And guess what? First, I didn't have experience on publishing online books. And first day, I just shared that information on my Facebook. I had no idea. Normally, when I share some post or something on my Facebook, maybe 5 people read and 3 of them share, and that's it. I'm not very popular Facebook person. But after I posted that information, that link, I was surprised. The next day, I checked my Facebook. I saw that 500 something people shared that link. And I saw them, man, we published 320 copies and 500 already. They shared the link, and I can check from that website. Hundreds and hundreds of people, they downloaded different versions of the textbook, because you can on the Pressbook, you can do that on EPUB versions and different formats. I saw that so many people started using that, and on September 2023, I believe, they sent me email that from Pressbook that the dictionary became the book of the month. And at that time, 8,500 downloads they had, and more than 20,000 people just viewed that. And I realized that it's apparently it's very powerful platform, this resource. But there are, so first of all, this again, accessibility. For me, that was very important. Bettina mentioned about the cost and etc. in addition to that. But some other things too. You can make corrections. You can update that. As one funny story, after we published that paper copy, and I participated in elders conference, and I had 5, 6 copies, and I handed out, I presented to elders, and one elder came with his grandson. So many people reviewed that dictionary, and no one noticed. Apparently, there was a mistake that I put 9 minus 3 equals 5. And that little guy, he was 7 years old or something. And you can imagine that's a conference, so many people. And he said, there is a mistake in in your book. And I wasn't able to fix that mistake, that everything is gone. But for online version, you can make corrections, you can update it, you can add something like now I'm working on statistics textbook, introductory statistics textbooks with Indigenous elements. It's statistics. We use some results of Stat Canada, some census results. It changed from time to time, and you can update it. You can change that one. So that's it provides more flexibility, and you can all the time you can improve your resources. So that was another reason. In addition, what Bettina mentioned, to create the online version of resources.
Thanks, Arzu. So I'm going to move us a little bit off the sort of open textbook side and into the question of Indigenous representation and cultural representation within your resources. Now, both of you have very practical subjects that you're working with. And so I'm wondering how you've incorporated Indigenous knowledges or Indigenous representation into your resources. And maybe I'll start with you, Arzu.
Okay, so I'm like Bettina, we are blessed that we work at First Nations University, and we have more. I think we are in we have some advantages to being here, because again, I remember my first day at the university. I met Elder Tony, so. We always work with elders every day. We meet them, and we teach Indigenous students. And for this dictionary, that there are different various dialects of Cree, and we wanted to make sure that its dictionary can be used in different communities, and elders from different communities, Creek speaking communities, they reviewed our dictionary from one elder from Alberta, another elder from Saskatchewan. In general, in all our projects, I invited elders for consultations and to follow research protocol. If you conduct any project in First Nations community, you have to receive their permission and you have to consult with elders. So that was one way of communication. Another way, as I mentioned, that we teach many Indigenous students. And I always invite Indigenous students as research assistants to work on the projects. And like I did one project about the Indigenous artifacts, and there is another book. It's also, I posted on the website. It's available. I had to interview 10 elders, and we hired 2 Indigenous students, and they interviewed elders. They had to record, and some elders, they didn't speak English, and that student, she was teaching, speaking Cree, and she also was translating. So that was a good experience for me and for students as well. So again, 2 main kind of ways working with elders and Indigenous students. So that was two options, 2 format of incorporation with Indigenous people.
Okay, Bettina, I'm going to ask you the same question then, just in terms of representation of Indigenous culture and knowledge within your resource, and maybe some of the challenges and opportunities that came out of that.
Absolutely, thank you. I'd say that it was very important for me to really, ensure that I was bringing in Indigenous voices, perspectives, information, not just knowledge, information as much as possible. I'm non-Indigenous myself. I knew that this area was the focus on essentially personal finance for Indigenous peoples. There was a gap in many of the current or at that time current mainstream personal finance resources. I had asked our director of student success services at the time, Grace McLeod, who worked very closely with the Elders Council and still does, to perhaps help me find some time to interview the elders. And so I ended up interviewing a number of the elders through the Elders Council, as well as some other elders that worked with the university. And I developed a set of questions focused on financial literacy, personal finance. Those elder interviews are so rich, and I use them every time I teach the class. I've used them in my my course for Simon Fraser University as well, with the graduate students. That was for me such an important part of the text, still is. I made sure that I incorporated a number of resources from, again, Indigenous organizations that have expertise and had worked in this area. So AFOA, OISTA, F&D, First Nations Development Institute. So I really looked to bring in their work and a lot of the ways they were adapting financial literacy resources for their communities and for just within their institutions. I really tried to look at pre and post contact histories of Indigenous people, as well as financial information that, is very important for, both Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people in Canada to be aware of. So for example, many of the mainstream resources at the time when I was developing the text, they didn't have a focus on taxation. And so they are, that is such an important topic when it comes to personal finance. So not having any focus, on taxation on reserve, that was an issue. So I made sure that, to really look for technical information that was missing from a lot of resources at the time. I made sure to really try to focus on values, histories, life experiences, as much as I could in the text in terms of the examples that I offered or cases. And certainly that was my focus with McGraw Hill too, right? Was to really focus on creating cases that shared certainly not only the technical information, but that had relevance to Indigenous students who would be reading these cases. And so these are just some examples, Donna, of the ways that I tried to incorporate Indigenous knowledge into the text. I think certainly looking at working within the networks within First Nations University helped me immensely. And our library was a bit, having our library very rich in resources as well in terms of Indigenous knowledge. That was a big support as well.
So I had, as you know, dozens of questions prepared for the interview today, but we're running out of time very quickly. And I know we have people here, undertaking the writing of a textbook is such an incredibly ambitious project. And I'm not sure that everyone that's here today is going to undertake that. But we also have the advantage that both of you are also instructing within First Nations University, or have done so in the past if you're in an administrative role now. So one of the other questions that I'd like to ask you, I think on behalf of many of the people that are attending today, when we have such a fabulous resource that we've now sourced, such as financial empowerment or Cree Dictionary of Mathematical Terms, what would you suggest in terms of classroom instruction and ways of incorporating Indigenous knowledge that we might find within those textbooks into our classroom. And just out of interest, I'm really interested in knowing and what might be different at First Nations University in terms of instruction. Double barreled. You can do the first part and I'll come back to the second part maybe later. So just in terms, the question was in terms of instruction, how would you suggest incorporating Indigenous knowledge or that we might even find within your textbook? Bettina, sorry, I got you up on the screen. I'm going to ask you first.
So I think that I think the more students can see themselves in what is being taught, the better, right? That is to me, you know, a guiding principle in creating a good textbook. And certainly when I set out to do this work, Indigenous knowledge was critical, right? In reaching, you know, for me in terms of reaching my students at First Nations University. And so I think that bringing elders into the textbook, that intergenerational learning, that was really critical. I certainly relying on Indigenous organizations and communities who have knowledge and expertise and you know, just resources to incorporate into the classroom, into the text. That was also another very important step in my journey, right? If I didn't have those networks and many of those organizations to lean on, I would have been at a loss. So I really, you know, that was critical, having just having those partners and that foundation previously before working on the text, just in the subject matter, to be able to know who to reach out to. So I would say in terms of looking for resources, it's looking often internally and, you know, within your institution, through the library, right, through, you know, we have a really excellent elders office, elders council, and so if that exists within your, you know, your university or within certain networks, partners, that's a great resource. Yeah, I think it's as much as, you know, bringing forth those Indigenous voices for me was one of the most important tasks within the text. And so I really tried to do that through elders, through cases, through examples, as Arzu was saying, right? Just that to me, yeah, helped immensely. And Donna, could you remind me the second question, second question?
Oh, I was just interested in hearing about, I know, I mean, one of the areas I was going to explore, and we may not be able to go in depth into it, is the different types of learning that are associated with Indigenous knowledge. So I'm just wondering if you could give us a couple of suggestions on ways that instruction might be different at First Nations University.
Absolutely. So I think for me, often the ways that it is perhaps a bit different is we have you know, a great emphasis on that intergenerational learning within the classroom, and so that's where we are very much encouraged to work with elders, work with our elders office and our elders council to incorporate elders into the learning. I think there's a great emphasis on experiential learning, right? And so, you know, the more that we can have students doing exercises or activities where they're getting a chance to really apply what they're learning. And so that's a big part of the text for me, is creating exercises, assignments within the courses I teach that are connected to those exercises that have students really applying what they're learning. And so, for example, I have a financial plan, right? That I have students at the end of a personal finance course, after we've gone through all the different key topics within the text, I ask them to bring it all together into a financial plan and actually put together their own individual financial plan to help guide them over the next 5 years. I think also creating or a pedagogical approach, I often use it at First Nations University. I think that we're encouraged to use is to ensure that learning has a personal and a holistic element. And so, you know, I really try to focus on values in the introduction of the text, and then I connect that to some bigger assignments on what are your values and how do they shape your relationship to money and the way you approach your finances. So I try to really make those linkages between the text and the classroom, and these are just some examples of pedagogical approaches that I think certainly First Nations University encourages and that I try my best to incorporate.
Thank you. That's really interesting. I'm going to switch to Arzu here and ask you the same question. So the first part was about pedagogical practice and what you would recommend in terms of incorporating your textbook for other people that might want to use it.
Yeah. First of all, I teach in my classes. I have Indigenous students and students from University of Regina, Indigenous and non-Indigenous students. And to be honest, my intention, if I teach physics, my intention is to teach physics in the best way, or to teach statistics in the best way. Another thing that is the use of Indigenous element helps me and makes my teaching, I hope, better. I use not only Indigenous, like Canadian Indigenous elements. I use, if I teach, let's say, about different numerical systems, I can give the examples about Mayan numbers, Arabian numbers, and so on. Bettina mentioned that I try to be holistic in my teaching, and I think that's the best way then if I want to be helpful for all students. But here I show some just specific examples that I prepared in advance, what I used in my textbooks. First of all, it was very helpful for that Cree dictionary, and we had a young Indigenous art young lady, Larissa. She helped me to develop those visual examples. Indigenous art. So that's what was used in our Cree dictionary. But for my other textbooks, for my statistics textbooks, I use some examples about Indigenous hand games. And there are videos available on the website, and I interviewed my own students who played Indigenous games, and I incorporate elders' interviews about Indigenous games, because that's about the probability, chance games, right? That's what I teach. And again, not just because that is Indigenous, but because it's a very good example for probability to explain the theory of probability. Another example that I will use in my physics, teaching physics, and we are working on physics textbook with my colleagues from University of Regina, like sound waves. One of the best examples is the drum. But again, if you incorporate elders interview, I made the video with the whole drum making lesson. There is a person who explains, a knowledge keeper who explains, and there is a student who helps him. And it's one thing, it just you read about that, another thing when you watch that process. And it's very helpful to understand. My, again, intention, my goal is to explain sound waves. But drum making, it's a good example to explain it. We use the other examples like to explain the friction. And we use the dog sleds example because indigenous people, they realize that using different materials, they can change the friction. They can, so that was a good example. And I mentioned about our project about water quality. So I use that example in my statistics classes to explain correlation because we compared the results in two First Nations communities. That was a very good example of correlation, about hypothesis testing. So again, my main intention is to teach my subject in the best way. And if I can use Indigenous examples to improve my teaching, I think that's one of the best resources that I have.
I've got one more question that I'm going to ask of both of you, but in the meantime, I'm also going to launch a poll here just for our people that are participating in this, and just ask you if you have a few minutes while we're concluding here to complete the poll or give us some feedback on the session. I'd sure appreciate that. So my last question, Arzu, since I've got you up, is what makes a great textbook?
Oh. It's a $1 million question. If I knew that exactly. So for me, it's not very specifically kind of academic answer. To make the kind of fair textbook. To be sincere in your explanations, in your examples, and because I live in different countries, I've learned about educational systems of different countries, and what makes Canadian educational system different and specific and what I like. It's a critical thinking. I think that many textbooks suffer of that. When you read the textbook, you think that, okay, in physics, everything is understandable and there is explanation for everything. There is no problem to solve. And the professor knows everything. So it's kind of stereotype. I think that I try to leave it, and I try to make the textbook to show that yeah, this is what you learn. It's just the foundation. There are many more things that to be discovered, and there are many problems which have not been solved. And to show some kind of opportunities, and there are many more steps to make. And another thing that I try in my textbooks, in my teaching, see, this is explanation that I provided. This is what I know, but this is not the only one explanation. There are many others. And again, I want to leave the kind of to show the perspectives, this the ways for improvement, not just I'm giving you this one and you return it back to me. No, it's to encourage the students, readers to continue. So this textbook is not the end of everything. That's just my suggestion. I don't know if I can do that, how well I can do that, but I try. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bettina, I'll ask you the same question. So what makes a great textbook?
So I think what makes a great textbook, and I'm just reiterating a point from earlier, is really creating a resource that allows students to see themselves reflected in what they're learning. So as Arzu said, being able to incorporate a number of different perspectives. I think certainly a multi-dimensional approach is really important in trying to offer varied resources within the text that assist with student learning, because we all learn differently, right? And so when I often find the more variety I have there, it helps with, a very diverse audience, and so, cases, a variety of different exercises, right, that students can apply in terms of what they're learning. I think going back to our earlier discussion, accessibility, I think is a really important piece. As Arzu said, in addition to open education resources being cost effective and accessible from anywhere, they are easily updated, as Arzu noted, and so there's often resources I can bring in annually, right? That links resources that weren't available in 2018, and so I think an open education resource allows for that kind of constant updating. I'm currently working on the second edition of the financial empowerment text this year, so I'm really trying to do a more sweeping review and update than I've often done in the past. So creating a lot of different links to other resources and organizations so that students have a number of tools to utilize, right? That's really, I think, helps with making a great text, especially open educational text. So, thank you.
Well, we're going to wrap up here. I have a whole lot of more questions I would love to ask the two of you, but I think we're coming to the end of this particular session. If anybody did want to stay for a few minutes and you had a question you wanted to pose to our two guests today, you're welcome to do that. We'll just give people a minute here to pose their questions. And I think we're probably going to run into, I have to run to my next event, my next class at this point. I'm just going to end my poll there and thank everybody that completed that. That's so helpful to have that information. If someone wanted to unmute, you're welcome to do that if you had a question you wanted to ask. And just give people a minute here. I'm going to mention as well that there have been many people that have been involved in developing our program for OE Week, and we've just got a few of the people here. If you have questions about, if this has just sort of raised your inspiration and you want to go out and take a look at what you might be able to do, resources you can find, we've got some links that I'm just sharing right now on the screen for people you can contact. Obviously, you're welcome to contact me, and I can probably put you in contact with somebody else for this. And I want to thank our two speakers for sharing your knowledge with us today, and just a fabulous experience. I'm convinced that we will have many people adopting at least 2 amazing textbooks within Sask Polytechnic, thanks to your presentations today. And I'm so appreciative. I think the thing that particularly interested me in this session was that we were dealing with 2 very practical subjects. And I think it's really interesting when we start to look at this incorporation of Indigenous knowledge, at that practical level, it has an absolutely different level of meaning. So thank you so much for your participation. Now I'm not just taking a look through the chat here, and I'm seeing lots of thank yous and lots of appreciation for the presentation today. Not seeing any questions, not having anyone sort of jump in and have questions they want to raise. I think we'll bring this session to a conclusion. So thank you so much. We do have other sessions that will be available throughout the week. And I did not provide the link for that, but I can certainly send it out to people so you can take a look at our other sessions that we've got planned for the rest of the week. the beautiful things about open work. The beautiful things about open work. The beautiful things about open work. The beautiful things about open work